this is Cheryl Allison, and this is Randi Silverman. And basically what I would like for y'all to do is talk about your background. You'll tell a little bit about yourself, Cheryl, and talk about your background in what you've done and how you've done it, and then what has led you into this. And then we'll move into having Randi talk about.
I love how she goes.
Yeah,
there you go.
she
copied me.
No, my name is Cheryl Allison, and I am a native Texan. I was born in Fort Worth and raised in Dallas. So I went to school here, and I went to college in Denton at Texas Women's University, and I was in music, and I got my bachelor's and master's in voice performance. So my background is musical theater, which I loved and did all through school. So when I graduated, I moved to New York and had been gone basically 20 plus years and have done Broadway shows and tours and that sort of thing as my career. A lot of regional theater, and recently have been at Casa Manana. I've done about 6 shows there. Love that theater.
And
they're really good to me.
She won some awards there too.
I pay her. No, so I did. So anyway, as everyone does, even though primarily I was paying my bills, obviously through musical theater. I did some television, did a little bit of soap operas and some TV work, and then through my course in theater, I met a woman named Karina Rush. We did a production of Camelot together, and we became dear, dear friends. This was back in 1991. And let's fast forward now to 2013. We've been friends for that long. We were talking on the phone, and she said, I'm producing a short film. I said, well, I didn't know you were a producer. She goes, yeah, I'm going to do it. It's a great script. She goes, I'm going to try it. There was a French director named Jonathan Beccari who had decided to write a short script about a young boy that is struggling with mental illness. And the script was written. They were having trouble casting the mother. And so she said, would you like to meet with him, talk with him? So I did, and I got cast in the role. And so we shot that in February of 2013. And throughout that process, as we were in pre-production for it, Karina was also friends with Randi, and I didn't know Randi, but their boys had gone to school together and done some community theater together and that sort of thing. And so Randi came on board to be a mental health consultant and to make sure we were handling the subject matter correctly. And that's how I met Randi. I'm going to let her talk about that part, but the film was called Illness, the short film, and it was submitted to film festivals worldwide and was very, very well received and won a lot of awards. And because of that, the audience reaction kept wanting to know more, because the short film was only 13 minutes into this family's life. And so many people were contacting us saying, we wish it was a feature film. We need something out there that portrays a young boy and a child, suffering from this, and parents, and how it affects parents and siblings. And so I'll let Randi take it from here, but obviously a feature film was made, and we shot that in the summer of 2014.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's a little bit about my background.
It's funny because I became involved in this also because of musical theater, because my youngest son has been a musical theater performer since he was, walking and talk. I joke he could sing and dance before he could walk and talk. And he was in a regional show, equity show in New York of Oliver. And so he was 8. He was one of the little orphan boys. And he met Karina's son, Gabe. And they became good friends, and that's how I became friends with Karina. But Karina didn't really know much about my history. All she knew was that I had this little boy who was a singer and dancer. And we stayed friendly and kind of stayed in touch, but as those of you who actually saw the movie, my life got a little hectic. And because of my experience with my middle son, became very involved in mental health advocacy. In fact, I'll back up a little bit. Has everybody seen the film? Mostly.
Most people.
So I have 3 boys, and when my middle son was very young, I had a feeling something didn't feel quite right to me. And I had him tested, and they said, "Oh no, he's fine." And I would ask the teachers, "No, he's fine. He's a great kid. You're just comparing him, to your older son who's so smart, right? Or you're just, you need to tighten up the reins a little bit." And his behavior started to become more and more erratic, as you may have seen in the film. And his first diagnosis when he was 3rd grade was anxiety. He started to show a lot of resistance to going to school. And I couldn't figure out why, and a little kid would hate school for no reason. I mean, it wasn't that hard yet. It was 1st grade, 2nd grade. How, who hates school at that age? So it turns out that he was diagnosed with anxiety disorder. He became so depressed and debilitated by that by the time he was 9 years old, he told me he didn't want to live anymore. And it got so bad that he would barely leave the house. And at that point, we knew it was something pretty serious, and we really struggled with what to do. But the doctors suggested medication, and as you see in the movie, I'm not a pro-medication person, but a 9-year-old shouldn't want to kill themselves. So you have to do what you have to do to keep your child alive. Ultimately, things spiraled out of control and got progressively worse, and he was in a psychiatric hospital for a period of time, and he was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. But by the time we got that diagnosis, he was really so ill that things had just spiraled out of control. And we tried, what you don't see in the movie is the dozens of doctors we went on, and the 50 different types of medication he tried, and the 60 pounds that he gained, and all the friends who disappeared, and how no one would come to the house. There's only so much you can even tell in an hour and 40 minutes. But so that was a really difficult time. Going through that experience, what was, however, very formative, obviously for me, but also for my whole family. I am educated as a lawyer. I was a lawyer before I had kids. As you see in the film, very, very lucky to be in a family of that has means to support their children. I was lucky enough to be able to stay home with my kids. And yet, when he first started developing what I now know are classic signs and symptoms, I had no idea that could even happen. And his teachers had no idea that could happen. And his pediatrician had no idea. And no one suggested that I send him or take him to a mental health counselor for an evaluation. And in fact, what I heard a lot of was, you need to be tougher, or try a sticker chart, or you need help. That scene where outside of the school, that really happened. It was a school psychologist who said to me, maybe you have some anxiety problems, and your son is okay. So when I started to realize that 1 in 5 children in our country suffer from a mental illness, that's almost 15 million children in the United States. That's just children, it doesn't even get to adults. And that it's so common, 1 in 5 in every classroom, that it doesn't discriminate, and that it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, your child can suffer from mental illness. I started to get a little angry. Why didn't I know that? Why didn't I know that this could happen? And what I really realized was I didn't know because no one talks about it. And once I learned about it, tried to treat it in my family with my children and husband just like I would if he had been diagnosed with asthma or diabetes. All right, you have a mental illness, you have bipolar disorder, this is what we're going to do. We're going to find the best, and we're going to get you treatment, and it's a brain disease, and it's not his fault. And I tried to teach my kids and people around me to treat it as something that was normal, as not normal, I don't believe in that word, but in something that could happen like any other illness. And I felt there was a real freedom in that. And when I decided that I needed to speak out and to change the way people think about it. And so I got very involved in my local community in mental health advocacy. I started doing public speaking and getting engaged with school districts, and I started to use my law degree to help other parents with special education advocacy for their children. And the more I talked about it, the more I realized how many people there were. Because for several years I was isolated in my house thinking I was the only one, and I wasn't. And that really just inspired me even more. So so at one point I sent out this mass email before I was on Facebook asking everyone on my email list to call their senator to support the Mental Health in Schools Act, I remember. And Karina called me up and said, I didn't know you knew anything about this. And I said, oh yeah, I know a little bit. She said, well, will you read the script for me? And I said, oh, sure. So I read the script of illness. It was 8 pages, and I thought, this happened in my house on a regular basis. It was a one scene, essentially, where the little boy loses his temper. I said, this is real. This is real stuff. And she asked me to come aboard and sort of act as a supervisor. She said, I don't know anything about film, but I can at least tell you, maybe you should change this sentence, and maybe the dad wouldn't really say that, but maybe the mom would say, little tiny tweaks and things like that. And then my youngest, they lost their lead actor a couple of days, and their location a couple of days before shooting was going to start. And they were like, that's it, the film's not going to happen. And I said, well, I know a 12-year-old boy who acts. And I said, Karina, you haven't seen him in 3 years, but maybe I'll send the director a picture. I literally sent Jonathan Noah's headshot, and he hired him on the spot without even talking to him because he looked just like her.
I know, and I look just like her.
And so he was hired, sight unseen. No offense to Noah, but and then we shot that film actually in my house. So that was a new experience for me, and I thought, well, maybe this will be a vehicle for something. And I wasn't really sure because, again, I was doing my own advocacy work, and I don't know anything about film. So I started to go out with them to the film festivals. I remember being at one in Ohio with Jonathan and Noah, and all the Q&As afterwards, everyone wanted to talk about mental illness. They weren't there to talk about film and all the stuff I thought that's what filmmaking stuff. They wanted to know about mental illness. And my brother has bipolar, my nephew, my cousin, or I do, and this is so important. And people would surround me and ask me questions about my personal experience with mental illness and with my son. And I thought, wow, people really want to talk about this. They're ready to talk about this. And I started to really understand the power film has. And I'm not a film person, so I didn't really understand how you can tell a story with a film in such a powerful, meaningful way that, as you said, can stick with you, right? So Jonathan, I sat down, I said, okay, what do we need to do? What does it take to make a longer film? Because 13 minutes just doesn't do the story justice. So we sat down and with Karina and came up with an outline, and they went off and crunched their numbers and tried to figure out who could we get on board to help us make this without spending $1 gazillion. And I just started writing the scenes and the dialogue just came out of me, just because it all really happened. And I turned to Jonathan and I said, I think we just wrote the story of my life. It was based on the original short with those family members, but I essentially had written scenes that really happened in my life, and it was really just an incredible experience, just writing it. And I thought to myself, if nothing ever happens, if I just get some good footage to be able to use for an educational video, that'll be good enough for me. And then I will have this educational piece. you know, and yet, I'm pinching myself because there's an actual movie now that's now
Just playing. It's playing in LA right now.
It's playing in LA. It was in movie theaters, and and it's a, we were ultra low budget film, and we, got a lot of volunteers, and all of the actors that you see, they worked for the bare minimum. Sorry, because when they read the script and saw this is really an important thing. So anyway, I could go on and on, but the purpose, my goal has always been to bring about an awareness and change the conversation in communities around the country about how we see mental illness and how we see especially children and families. So this is an interesting statistic that a lot of people don't seem to know. The symptoms of 50% of all lifetime chronic cases of mental illness emerge 50% of the time before the age of 14 years old. And 75% before the age of 24. There are currently over 60 million Americans in the United States who suffer from mental illness, from a diagnosable form of mental illness.
What's the percentage here, Randi?
It's 50% of symptoms emerge before the age of 14, and 75% before the age of 24. Now, the average time from onset of symptoms to diagnosis is 9 years. It takes that long because mental illness is a difficult illness to diagnose. We don't have blood tests, we don't have brain scans. They're working on it, and we really don't understand enough about the brain. And my mission is to teach people about the fact that it's a brain disease. Go ahead.
And do they look at that? Do they look at the 5-HTP and the L-theanine and the tryptophan and the theanine, with L-lysine? Do they look at all of those which help the neurotransmitters?
Are you talking about in diagnosis?
Yeah, as far as treatment to help
They're
treat
really
it?
not. Very, very, very seldom are they doing that, especially with children. I mean, there are a few special doctors here and there that do that.
They're like more alternative, correct?
Yes, it's considered much more alternative. The traditional psychiatry methods, there is a genetic test now that some psychiatrists are using that can help determine if a certain medication will actually be effective, but not for but diagnosis tools are still very, very limited. And my feeling is we don't put as a society money into research the way we do other life-threatening illnesses. The fact is that a person with bipolar disorder has a 25-year shorter life expectancy.
Wow.
And 50% of every person diagnosed with bipolar disorder will attempt suicide. 50%. And I think the numbers are like 20% of those will be successful. That one I'm not 100% sure on. But it's a life-threatening illness. Mental illness is life-threatening. And in fact, suicide, which 90 some odd, personally I would think 100% cases of suicide are as a result of some form of underlying mental health condition, is the second leading cause of death in ages 15 to 24 years old.
And you would think after the things that have happened in the colleges, and of course Columbine and the elementary school in Connecticut. I'm sorry.
Sandy Hook.
Yeah. That they would take that more into consideration because each of the kids that had that were either some of them were teased, but they were men, which affects more, and they act out more and they kill. And you would think that they would be looking at that.
And in almost all of those cases, they have retraced that there were symptoms for years. Adam Lanza is a very good example. The study that was done shows that the school district knew that he was suffering from something, and his mother isolated him. Now, one thing I would never do when I have a chronically ill person in the house is to have any kind of weapons.
Yeah,
But I understand that mother, Adelaine's mother, tried to get help and didn't know how to get help and felt very stigmatized and alone.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Mental illness is the biggest public health crisis we have as a society. Sadly, the media sometimes treats it as a public safety issue. Well, we have to make things safe and not let people who have mental illness have guns. I think it's really, let's figure out how we can help people with mental illness before their illness becomes so acute that they become dangerous. A lot of mental health organizations get very nervous if you put shootings and guns in the same sentence as mental illness. I'm not afraid of that discussion.
No.
To me, I feel it is part of the discussion. I know that when my son was very, very ill, I didn't know what he was capable of doing. He didn't know what he was capable of doing. He wasn't in his right mind, literally. And so I think the problem is that as a society, we're putting money into, well, first of all, our jails are filled with people with mental illness. And that's because we have no psychiatric facilities. And the police are not trained in crisis intervention, and there just are not enough hospital beds. There are not enough psychiatric facilities. And when it comes to children, there are even less.
Yeah.
And so I have a whole theory that I believe with any illness, early intervention is essential. The earlier you treat any illness, the better the prognosis. That's just the way any illness is.
Because if you catch it early enough, you can hopefully nip it in the bud
Absolutely.
so it doesn't get any larger.
Oh, absolutely. You can.
Yeah,
I
you
believe
can.
you can.
I know. I've been there, done
Yes.
that. But it's like the news. The problem with the news also is everything's a sideshow because it's all about ratings. So they're only going to give it enough airtime where they're going to get the ratings, and then they're going to go off to someplace else.
And I'm not putting this on the media. I think it's a vicious cycle of stigma, society.
It's also embarrassing.
It's,
People don't want to.
Right. Well, my thoughts are, if we can change the conversation and we get just regular people, regular parents, to have this understanding that, you know what, children can have a mental illness for no reason, and there are things we can do about it, and let's have interventions. We need to have interventions very early, and the way to do that is to educate parents, to educate teachers, and the first line of people who see children, including teachers, coaches, and pediatricians, and to educate children very young. We teach children in school and health classes all about AIDS and sex and drugs, and there's no programming to teach them about mental health awareness. And we need mental health literacy in our school programs in our schools, and we need teachers to learn the basics. They don't need to learn how to be a psychiatrist, but they need to be able to notice, well, there are signs, and maybe be able to advise parents to look for help or diagnosis. Just like they would say your child can't read the board and you should take them to an eye doctor. I mean, that's how it should be treated. So the movie, to me, is a catalyst for that. It's a catalyst for conversation. And if we can take the movie and get people to have conversations. I mean, the first thing they have to do is see it. And we're, as we've talked about, it will be available, we're so excited, tomorrow, video on demand throughout the country in all major platforms, Time Warner, Cox, Comcast, streaming on Walmart, iTunes,
Vimeo,
right,
Amazon
Vimeo. It will be available on DVD through our website, and in May through Amazon. It's also available in Canada. We have had it in some screenings, and we're continuing to show in film festivals. I'm in fact going to Palm Beach in April for a big film festival down there. And the other thing we're doing is I'm actually establishing a nonprofit organization called the Youth Mental Health Project, and that nonprofit is going to take the film around in communities to have community screenings and community conversations. We have all this talk about community mental health, right? Every community treats it differently. And so my thought is, what if we bring communities together and collaborate with all the stakeholders in youth mental health and say, okay, what's going on here in this community? What's happening in Dallas? Because what's happening in Dallas is different than what's happening in Austin, let's say. And just as an example. And so I'm hoping that will be another thing that we can do with this film to, to get people to not just see it, but okay, let's use it now for a point of conversation.
The other good thing about that, doing the mental health project, is that there's a lot of people who have stigmas about the mental health. And there was an old movie with, I think Cheaper by the Dozen, no, not Cheaper by the Dozen, it was with Steve Martin, and his son is acting up, and they say he needs to go into a special class. Well, it really zeroed in on how some parents feel when they're told by the schools, and they did it in a humorous way, but that is still out there.
Absolutely.
There is a major stigma, and by bringing in a project and involving the community, maybe, just maybe, when people see that there's more than just me out there or you out there, bring it together, they're going to go, hey, maybe we can change it.
Well, it's interesting because we've been contacted by so many people throughout the nation, that, and especially moms, that have written in saying, when can I see it? Where can I show it? Like this one woman wrote us, and she was in a very small town in Wisconsin, and she said, I have no resources here, and I have a child who is suffering, and no one understands, and I'm being blamed by my family, by friends. They all think it's my fault. And she said, I can't talk about it, but maybe I can show them this, and it can be my voice. And
I'm actually online on Facebook. There are several groups, big but private groups, parents with children who have mental illness or parents who are caring for children with bipolar. And there's been a lot of buzz about the film on, and several moms said, I don't think I'll be able to watch this. I just sent my son to residential treatment, or my son is in jail, or whatever. I don't think I'll be able to watch it. It looks heartbreaking. And I wrote back, it's not for you. It's for you. I mean, it's for you to show other people around you so that they understand how to support you, so they understand, that's
a good project to give out to like psychiatrists or psychologists, and have them a DVD, hand it to their patients and say, look at this, and then let's talk more.
And in fact
tell them about the Huffington Post review, because this was really, I think, the goal for all of us, from the actors to the creative team to everything for the film. Because the gentleman.
Well, there are a couple things. One is I've already been approached by psychology professors at graduate schools to use it as part of the classroom, which I think is awesome.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I find it kind of amazing how Governor Huckabee can make a comment on a national news network that the shooting, it's not going. And I'm not going to get into this. But it's not. It's the mental health issue. But when he says that, he's lumping in, all the people affected by mental illness, which I spoke to somebody who works in a psychiatric hospital, and he was saying how that's unfair to the other people who have mental illness. And his grade from the Mental Health Institute of America, if that's a thing, was a D- for his state in mental health care.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. And the statistics show that less than 4% of violent crimes are perpetrated by people who have mental illness, and yet they are 11 times more likely to be victims. Guns are used mostly by people who have mental illness for suicide. And there's a lot of suicidal behavior. It's I don't have the right expression, cops by suicide. They get in trouble. So thank you. I couldn't think of the expression. So you're absolutely right. I went to the National Council for Behavioral Health Conference. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. The National Council for Behavioral Health is a huge Washington, D.C. organization that encompasses all the big mental health organizations in the country. And they had a conference in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago with 10,000 people there. And I met this very prestigious psychiatrist named Dr. Lloyd Sederer. And I met him, and I kind of begged him to come see the movie. And it turns out that he's the medical editor of the Huffington Post. So I was begging him, please, come see this movie. And, I think at first he thought I was you know, I don't know what he thought exactly. But he knew a friend a mutual friend who said, yes, really do go see this movie. So he came to our opening night in New York, and I was holding my breath the whole time because, you know, what if you didn't like it? I mean, you know, I'm way too close to it to know whether it's really good or not. He wrote this review on Huffington Post that, from a psychiatrist's perspective, basically said, this is what we've been waiting for. This is the tool we've been waiting for.
So it was a master class.
A master class, he called it. Yeah.
Tool to show, so it was really great.
Randy, was your bipolar son present during the filming?
It's interesting. He actually did help me with the screenplay, in that I would write pieces and show it to him and talk to him, and you know, and so he was very involved and on board with all of that. Let me back up. He was the second cameraman on the short film Illness, because he's very into photography and film himself. So he was on set for that film. This film was a little harder for him, and he was supposed to be on set, but he found it a little difficult, and so he was not on set for most of the time. He was still very, very supportive of it. I would never, people ask all the time, did your children support you? I would never have done this film if my children weren't supportive of it, because yes, it's my story, but it's their story. And they have actually all become very involved in mental health advocacy. I guess I have had an influence, I don't know. But it took my middle son a little while before he had the courage to watch it, and frankly, I was really nervous about his reaction. And he's 19 years old, by the way, so when he watched it, I guess when we first finished it 6 months ago, or whenever it was, a year ago, and I stayed in the other room, and he was watching in the living room, and he stopped it right after a really difficult scene, and he came into the kitchen and he was crying. I'm like, are you okay? He goes, yeah, I just need water. Can you have water? And he went back and finished the film, and he came in with tears in his eyes, and he gave me a hug, and he said, Mom, I had really forgotten so much. Thank you so much for making this film. He said that I never saw the other side. I never saw what you guys went through. I never saw what I put my brothers through. I have such a different perspective now, and it's really helped me. Thank you so much for making it. And we were both, of course, crying. And so now he's come to screenings with me, and he participates in Q&As. So it's really been great. And of course, you know, my younger son played the part of Timothy, who's based on my middle son, when he was very sick and a little bit older. So.
Did the UK audiences react the exact same way Americans did?
Well, we did get an award at the Southampton Film Festival, 3 actually. We got Best Actress, Best Actor for my son, and the Best Screenplay. So they loved it there.
They welcomed the short film too.
Yeah, so
we were successful there.
Yeah, so we were waiting to see if we'll have distribution. In the UK, they have a lot. They're really starting a big mental health awareness movement there, and so I think they will definitely be on board. In Canada, they seem to be very, very interested. I've gone up to a couple screenings in Canada, and I believe it will. I hope that it will sort of reach beyond cultural barriers of. You know.
Was UK and Canada like Americans in that they wanted to talk more about mental illness than the workings of filmmaking?
Yeah.
They were?
Yeah.
Same kind of thing?
Yeah.
Because they have kind of a different medical system.
Very
over
different.
there.
And I think theirs is more advanced than ours, and I sat and talked to a bunch of people, and they said, oh, yours is better than ours. We had like a little disagreement over whose was worse.
We had a really positive review in a London-based online, you know, entertainment magazine, and they really talked about their mental health system
Yeah.
in London. Remember, it was the Vulture Hound, I believe.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and
That's
they
right.
were just right on.
A
as far
Time
as
to
seeing
Change, I think, is the name of their organization.
Mm-hmm.
Time to Change, and they, that they do a lot of really good work with awareness and videos. I think everyone in the mental health community who's involved in the movement of bringing mental health awareness to the forefront is all agree that sharing stories is the way to change the way people see things, and being open about your own story, not hiding in a closet. So, I mean, what better than a film that shares a story? People ask, why didn't I make a documentary? I think a feature film plays to a wider audience. Not everybody wants to watch a documentary, and there are plenty of documentaries out there on mental illness, but there really hasn't been a film like this about a child unless it's been a very negative portrayal, or unless the portrayal has some kind of excuse as to why the kid, oh, well, of course, because that happened to the kid.
Ordinary people.
Ordinary people, for instance, of course he tried to kill himself because he watched his brother drown.
Right.
So there's always a reason, and a lot of times there's no reason. I mean, there are triggers, clearly.
It's not that easy.
Right.
It's not that simple.
Not that simple.
Right.
I mean, you're doing the political process right now, which we won't go into a lot of it, but still, when you're talking about people becoming president and senators, all this can't be done without funding. And in order to get that funding, it has to be supported by the bigwigs in Congress and Senate and possibly the president as well. So have you approached the candidates or sent anything to certain candidates?
It's interesting. I actually emailed a friend of mine who somehow knows Hillary Clinton, and I was like, can you get the film in front of her?
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
It's her and Bernie and
Right. I think they exactly. So I'm going up in June. I'm going down over wherever I am to DC for Hill Day in June, and we're hoping to do a screening.
Okay.
I think every legislator needs to see this film. There are a lot of bills that have been hung up in Congress. I don't know if you're aware of any of them. Tim Murphy has one. Chris Murphy has one. Frankly, one of the better ones, I think, is the Mental Health in Schools Act, which is just completely stalled. And the Mental Health in Schools Act does exactly what I'm suggesting, which is mental health literacy programs and teaching teachers to watch for warning signs. And that's just, I mean, I don't understand. To me, this should not be a partisan issue, but it's become very partisan. And so Tim Murphy's bill has some good things in it. Chris Murphy's bill has some good things in it. But then they stack on all this other
all the other stuff that isn't as important, and then one side or the other doesn't want to vote for it because of all that extra. If they just keep it clean, it would be fine.
And there's a there are different angles of looking at it. So some people look at Tim Murphy's bill as, again, more about public safety, not about public health, because in my personal opinion, they both really speak to crisis intervention as opposed to Mental Health in Schools Act, which speaks more to early intervention and possible prevention, which I think is really where we have to go. But you're right. I mean, it's a mess. But the truth is, they can keep sweeping it under the rug as long as the rest of us remain silent. So as long as we don't talk about it and we are ashamed and hide in our rooms with our children who are, throwing chairs across the room, then we're not going to get anywhere. And
there's a 5-year wait list, for example, for, I think it is in Texas, I just read this in a paper that my mother was recycling, but it's for, I think, beds. I think it's for beds in psychiatric hospitals for anybody, an adult or a child. I mean, that's very vague. It was way more specific than that. But and also, I had a question for you, Ms. Silverman. Is when did you see the largest piece of progress that your son Eli made, in his life?
We had some very dark times where I didn't know if he would live through his teenage years, much less graduate from high school. And honestly, the moment I saw hope the moment I saw, like, oh, there is a light way down there at the end of the tunnel, was when he got his hair cut. It really was a true moment where he had been hiding in this hair, and he lost all hygiene, you know. It was horrible, and he was at the residential treatment center, and he'd been there about a year, and it just felt like nothing was going to get better. And one day, it's like I felt like we were finally making progress, and he decided to get his hair cut. And I wanted to do a scene, but we ran out of time and money, where you see him getting his hair cut with the hair falling away, and you see his face, you know, lifting, and that was a really pivotal moment. Which you know, we probably weren't looking for something so dramatic and specific, but then right after that, he decided to have a bar mitzvah, and
How old was he then?
well, he ended up having it right before he turned 14. So the fact that he had a bar mitzvah at all,
Yeah.
That's huge.
because to learn to read Hebrew, I mean, the kid had a hard time reading anything, and learning and focusing were so difficult, because his moods were so, children rapid cycle when they are severely ill with bipolar. And so his moods were so all over the place. That's why school was so difficult. That's why he was afraid to go to school, because he didn't know what was going to happen. So that he decided he was willing to sit down and learn enough Hebrew to have a bar mitzvah, and then he had it, and he got up and read from the Torah in front of people
And
at
the
a temple.
chanting and the vowels.
He didn't quite chant, but
Okay.
you know, I was.
It's good enough.
That to me was huge, and ultimately he was away for 3 years. Ultimately, he came back. He went to high school close by, and he graduated from high school on time. Which this was a kid who lost 2 years of school, if not more, and he, you know. He's my real hero. I mean, honestly, it's not easy living with an illness like that, and he is just a pretty amazing kid. He really is. He's 19. I'd be really upset if I was calling him a kid. Don't put that in any article.
Mom.
He's a young man.
Yes, amazing young man.
He's
Amazing
great.
young man. And my older son too. I mean, all three of my kids. My older son. He has a great TEDx talk out there that he did. His name is Max Silverman. I'll use his name. It's had over 30,000 views, and it's all about his experience as a sibling. And so he's become very involved and active in mental health stuff also, as has my younger son in high school. So family that, you know, advocates together, I don't know.
Stays together.
At least the children and the two.
I had a question for Cheryl. Getting into this role, I mean, it was really amazing. I saw that. I mean, it did really at home, because I seen that at home growing up. And was there a personal experience that you drew from to do this?
Yeah, you know, I came from a lot of different angles, but I do have a loved one who has, in their adult life, started to experience massive anxiety and a panic disorder, and I had not had any type of experience with it before then. And ironically enough, it happened about 2.5 months before we started filming. So, you know, here I was learning the script and then also dealing with it with a person in my immediate, you know, family. So that gave me a real personal look at it. I knew the character really well because of the short film. So I'd done my homework, as you do as an actress, where you do your research and you get to know the character. But then meeting Randi, you know, on the set of the short film, we're like sisters. I just adore her. And I know we're hanging out all the time. Oh, picture time. And so it took it to a different level. Like, I don't think I'll ever do another role that will be as important for me as this, because it wasn't just an acting role. I have now become an advocate for mental health.
I've sucked them all in.
No, seriously, and raising awareness, because I realized then, you know, through my own experience, talking with Randi, you know, just falling in love with her boys, and then doing research with friends. When I said on Facebook, you know, I was doing this role, all of a sudden, some of my friends I hadn't spoken to since high school, I went to Skyline High School here in Dallas, you know, we're friends, but I haven't seen them. They started contacting me, you know, messaging me privately and saying, Cheryl, I saw you're doing this role. I have a daughter, or I have a grandchild, or I have a son, or my husband. They all started reaching out, wanting to tell me their story. So I actually met with several of them privately and heard their story, and I realized how rampant it is. Mm-hmm. And, you know, learned it wasn't just, you know, Randi's voice. It was so many people's voice. So it became, I felt a huge responsibility to be as authentic and as truthful as I could be to represent, you know, Randi and these other women. So, you know, I studied with my acting coach, did all of that stuff, but then it really was the personal connections I got talking to these people in Randi that really helped, and my own personal experience with it to help bring the character complete for me.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that was really helpful to me in writing as well, I wanted to make a film that was honest and truthful, but that anybody who had any kind of experience with mental illness could relate to on some level, mm-hmm. you know, whether it was as the sibling or and so I started a support group about 5 years ago in Westchester County, New York, where I live, and I run it with another friend of mine, and we're just two moms, you know, running a support group for parents raising children with a variety of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and mood disorders. We've had over 800 families come through our support group in 5 years.
Wow.
So I hear the stories over and over and over again, and I tried to take things that I heard over and over and over again that were common themes, so that this story is really a compilation of a lot of stories and people and scenarios. I mean, you know, so much of it did happen truthfully in my life, but I tried to make it come out in a way that really would do justice to all of those stories, mm-hmm. and not just particularly mine. And so, you know, when you get people, as Cheryl said, reaching out and they start to share, and you start to go, wow, me too. You know, that's the feeling I want the film to have.
You know what's an interesting thing from a film standpoint, you know, because she hadn't done a film before. So, you know, all of us that are actors or producers or directors, we get it from a film standpoint. And when they were doing a feature, they're thinking about trying to make money, right? How are we going to at least get a return on something, hopefully? And I was grateful they kept me in the role. I am not recognizable talent. I'm a stage actress from New York, you know. My whole background was mostly musical theater. But they retained me in the role, and they retained Noah. So they were saying, it would be really great if we could get some, you know, quote unquote, recognizable talent to get into the film, because it helps us. It helps us get it distributed.
Yeah. We did have some options.
And we did, but what's so interesting is you know, you didn't have to look hard. All of a sudden, Alicia Reiner, she plays my best friend in the film, amazing woman, an actress. She is best known, she's on Orange is the New Black, mm-hmm. and she was in Sideways years ago. She's just been in the business a long time. She contacted our producer. She found the film, read the subject matter, said, hey, I have been affected by this. I have a nephew, I think it was on her husband's side of the family, that had a bipolar episode when he was a teenager. And she said, this is close to my heart. I would like to give him my talent and time for it. Wow. And they said, well, you know, read it. We've got these parts available. She said, I'd like to play the best friend. So everybody was taking a reduced rate. You know, it was a SAG, ultra low budget. And, you know, Kathy and Jimmy did the same thing.
Just read the script.
Yeah, and she said,
Janet Hubert.
And Janet Hubert, who's best known for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And, of course, we all know Kathy and Jimmy. And then the gentleman who played my husband, who I'm absolutely in love with, he's fantastic, is Richard Berge. Probably best known from Desperate Housewives, and the most wonderful man ever. And he said, I believe in the subject matter. You know, these people reduced their rate took time to come because they believed in it. And that really made the film special as well, because it really became a cause, you know, not just a film.
And every day at filming, I try to like give everybody a big moment. Okay, I want you to know what happened in real life, and the scene we're about to film was, you know,
So we really need to wrap it up.
really, because I could just keep.
Let's go.
Started.
Always the boss, right?
But, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to wrap up with, either one of you?
Well, we've talked about that it is going to be, I think that's important, that everyone can see it now on cable, on demand. I mean, I can list them off. You can choose to write, but it's going to be Time Warner, Cox, Comcast, Charter, Verizon Fios, Dish, DirecTV, Mediacom, and Bright House. And that is really incredible for an indie film, our distributors tell us, because a lot of times they'll just go straight to sort of Vimeo or iTunes, but they sent it out to cable, and a day later cable picked it all up. And it's going to be released tomorrow, which is World Bipolar Day.
Will you give the website?
The website is nolettinggomovie.com.
And we will be streaming from the website and
Selling DVDs.
And arranging community screenings, because I think that's a really important thing also, that you know, this film will hopefully make a difference. We have no Hollywood backing. It's all privately funded.
That might be a good thing.
Well, we made a choice. I think the screenplay was good enough that we could have, and I actually wouldn't let it go.
Well,
Jonathan might have been happy if we did. I said no. I need to know this is going to be done the right way.
It might not
I
be
don't
the
want
same
it to
film.
be a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, that's just it might change.
And my middle son, who has bipolar, he's the one who said, Noah has to play this part. Who else will know this?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm sure there were other wonderful boy actors that could have.
So by going on the website, someone who doesn't have cable and all that, they can
Yes.
just stream.
They
it's
can't-
not
it'll
up right
be-
now, but it will be within the next
Yeah, the next
But then
It
for
won't be for another
streaming,
week or
like
two.
somebody does it, eventually it'll be on
They wanna stream
Netflix,
it.
but it's on iTunes and
Okay.
Amazon Prime.
But we're going to start selling. We could start selling the DVDs.
But
first.
Google Play, all of those different types of, like a streaming service through Walmart, that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah, I'll try.
So thank you.
We have one more good
Thank
thing.
you.
Okay,
Thank you so
huggies.
much.